Jim Foley asked a couple of weeks in the comments how the kosher meals compared to the regular meals that all the other inmates were issued. I'd mentioned that I received the kosher meals while I was at SADF, that's New Corcoran. The short answer is that the kosher meals are better, a lot better, but there's actually a lot of information I can give about the kosher meals program in CDCR, at least while I was locked up. The first time that I saw a kosher meal was whenever I was living in the day room bunks, the open-air dormitories in New Corcoran, after I'd become an SNY inmate, after I'd rolled up. I'd been there at New Corcoran for about a week, and I was distressed. You see, I'd spent years, about 5 years, living in cells, and in cells in a very hyper-violent environment. And I'd been moved to this environment where I was expected to sleep with a bunkie and neighbors to the left of me and the right of me, and people walked around and talked at night, and there was no structure, there wasn't a shot caller, and I was in a quiet panic. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. It was a really distressful environment for me. I adjusted, but the first week I was there was very difficult. A gentleman named Joshua Cohen saw that I was having a hard time of it, and he really reached out and tried to get me to relax and understand that I was in a different environment than what I was used to. He was very kind and spent a lot of time with me for that first week, probably 4 or 6 hours a day playing Scrabble and just kind of hanging out. We got to be friends. This was nice of him because he was gay, and he was very popular. He was pretty, and he had a lot of guys that wanted to hang out with him. And I think he just got tired of doing that social scene and just wanted to play Scrabble. It really was a nice, wholesome environment. He was a very kind guy, and I think he just wanted to help me because he could tell that I wasn't used to not being in an environment where there were knives and things like that. One day, while he and I were playing Scrabble, he opened up his lunch, and I'd been aware he was on a special meal program, but I hadn't given it much thought until I saw him open his lunch, and it was better than my lunch. It was honestly better than my breakfast, lunch, and dinner combined, and if you really want to get down to it, it might have been better than mine and my bunkie's breakfast, lunch, and dinner combined. It was a great meal comparatively. I looked at it and asked him, "Where'd you get that? That's your lunch? You're kidding me." And he explained that he was Jewish, and because he was Jewish, he qualified for the Kosher Meals program. You see, his family had been Orthodox, and whenever he came out, it had caused problems between them because they were a very insular community. And he turned to crime after that. And of course, he didn't come to prison for being gay. He came to prison for shooting a drug dealer and stealing his drugs. But it was a sad story because you could see the path that had ended with him in prison and how it had started. He expressed to me that the only way to get this meal was if you had Jewish heritage, if you were a Jewish inmate. That there had been a lawsuit, and that people who were religions that had a special dietary requirements, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, that CDC was providing those meals to them. It made sense that I'd never seen these meals. It was the Jewish meal. I'd never seen a Jewish meal. I'd never seen a Jewish inmate. Heck, I hadn't heard the word Jewish. It was generally Jew, or more accurately, dirty Jew or worthless Jew. You see, the Jewish inmates on the line, and I'm sure there are some, kept it very quietly to themselves because it wasn't an okay thing to be Jewish. There were a bunch of very angry, Nazi, skinhead, hate-filled men who had things to say about, and they had plenty of words they would use to describe Jews. But let's say Oven Dodger is probably the nicest one. I'm not going to repeat the rest. I want to take a moment and point out that not all active inmates are racists. It's easy to generalize. It's the same way that not all SNY inmates are pedophiles. Most guys are just trying to do their time. They don't care what color your skin is. They want to go home to their families, or maybe their meth habits, I don't know, but the point is they don't want to be in prison and they don't want to play prison politics. But here's the thing, that if you did time on an active yard of 4, you sat down with a couple of swastika tattooed down skinheads and listened to a conversation about how the Jews run the media, or about the most efficient way to round up and kill all the colored people. It might have made you sick, you might have hated sitting at the same table with those guys, but you met them, you knew them, you lived on the tier with them. That's just the environment of an active 4, and maybe you were able to block it out or ignore it, but it was there. I didn't have the ability to block it out or ignore it. I was acutely aware of how some inmates felt about Jews, because I have a significant amount of Jewish heritage. And I knew that if I was honest about who my parents were, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, about who I was, they'd do a lot worse than call me an oven dodger. This put me in a unique environment because I was their friend, their brother. They slapped me on the back, said they'd die for me. And I couldn't understand why they hated me. And they did hate me. They didn't know it. But if they knew who I was, they hated me. They'd murder me if they could. And so I asked them questions. I tried to understand. The conclusion I came to is it was laziness more than anything else. It was just easier to hate something. It was easier to put a group of people in a box. Talking to Joshua about the kosher meals, he expressed that CDC had a test to see if you qualified for the kosher meal program. You had to apply, and you had to tell him, the rabbi, who your parents were and who your grandparents were, so they could determine that you were genetically Jewish, that you had Jewish heritage. I always thought this was a terrible test, and it created a lot of conflict amongst the inmates, because most inmates aren't going to qualify for the kosher meals, which are much better than the meals that other inmates are receiving. CDC's test to determine if you were going to enter the kosher meals program, it was laziness too, and eventually it was shot down by the Supreme Court as patently racist. You can't let people participate in a meal program based upon who their parents were. That's absurd. But it was easier for CDC to have some simple test like that than actually try and talk to the Jewish inmates, the Muslim inmates, the Buddhist inmates, and determine that they were sincere in their beliefs and actually needed to get the religious meals, that they weren't scamming the system. Again, it was an equal mix of racism and laziness. I am not at all surprised we see those things so commonly together. After all, it's just easier to take a group of people and ascribe certain characteristics to them and then not think about them anymore. But if you do that, you guarantee first that you're going to be wrong about them, because nobody is simple. Nobody's one thing. But you're also going to guarantee that you are going to get into a terrible, sloppy habit of generalizing. We all do it to some degree. I generalized in this video. I said that everybody who hit a 4-yard, an active yard, sat down at a table with a couple of skinheads talking skinhead stuff. That's not true. I guarantee you there's people out there who didn't. It's just that it was easier to say everybody instead of almost everybody. Same as it was easier for CDC to start looking at birth certificates instead of interviewing people about their religious beliefs, or just investing in infrastructure and making sure that they had the facilities to provide kosher meals and halal meals and vegetarian meals to as many inmates that wanted them. If you are encountered in your everyday life an opportunity to look at something a second time, to not generalize, to really take your time and see what it is instead of what your first impulse is to say what it is, you will be surprised at how much you see if you really take the time to look.